Welcome to a new episode of the Creative Industry Insight podcast. I'm your host, Bobby. With the release of the Holdovers in the UK over the past weekend, we welcome costume designer Wendy Chuck. Wendy will join us to talk about her work in creating the looks in the film. Please be warned that there are heavy spoilers in this episode. Now let's jump into the conversation with Wendy. Hi Wendy, thank you for joining me today.
Hi, Robert. Thank you for having me.
We're here to talk about the Holdovers, which came out last year in the States, but it's about to come out, or as this is being released, has come out in the UK. I'm excited for people to watch it. It's it's a film that you you kind of just get transported into the world, and you get, as an audience member, you feel like you're a fly on the wall in the lives of a few weeks of these people, and you kind of come to love and enjoy being a part of their presence.
Yep. I would agree, story-wise. Um,
And I guess on top of that as well, it's just having a film sort of set in a period of time. I guess as a costume designer, it kind of gives you a nice little moment to really how could be creative and sort of flex your creativity on the screen of what you want to show and how you can build characters around like the costumes that they're wearing as well.
yeah, in many ways, it is that. It's not really any different to contemporary movies because we're always creating characters and enhancing the story and building building on what we're reading on the page to flesh it out. So as much as the actor does their work and backstory and research, we do ours. And, you can't just slap on a period costume and feel like that's a character. You also have to do your research and look for what works for a person, a character, a body, what they're saying, what the emotional beat of a scene or the script is, and so forth. So in many ways, it's not that different to creating a contemporary story. In practical terms, it's easier to get contemporary clothes. And when you have big crowd scenes, to invite people to wear their own. So that's where the extra work comes in with doing a period film or piece.
Do you find that when it comes to period films, that because you're looking at a certain time and going from a certain decade to another decade, so from here, the 60s to the 70s, because there's always like a mass, it feels like when you're looking at certain time periods, there's also a lot being said in terms of what people are wearing and the sort of movement and political landscape there is at the time. Is that something that you take into consideration when you're designing a period piece?
Oh, absolutely. I always go back into history of the time. I look at what political and world events were going on at the time. I look at, just fashion of that time, but prior to that time. And in this case, set in 1970, it was wrong to go into the 70s per se, but the 60s was such a period of political change and cultural change in the entire world. And it didn't seem right to go into fashion per se. So this is not a particularly fashionable movie. I feel like it's really rooted in the late 60s, and in particular this geographical part of the world and the institution of education, and in particular Massachusetts. So yeah, I mean that's where I started building ideas and gathering research. And one of the beautiful parts of the research was the yearbooks for the schools, we were able to get our hands on the yearbooks for some of the schools that we were shooting in. Most photos were in black and white, so I had to imagine a lot of color. But that was where the real gems were in creating at least the boys and the professors' looks.
When you start going through your research, and because with the setting of a private school, boys will have I guess, a little bit more sheltered life than people who are in a less fortunate position, shall we say. When they have their clothes and going through yearbooks, is there a specific look that you want to go for, that they will have a certain type of blazer or trousers that will be associated with them with status in the school? But then also because in the early parts of the film, the kids that are staying over for the Christmas break, they're all coming from different backgrounds. So you have one child who's, I think it's Mormon, is from a Mormon family.
Yeah,
And then you have another child who's from Korea, I think. And then you have another child whose dad, I think, sells helicopters or something along those lines, or is in
yeah,
some sort of industry. So they're
yep.
all sort of a big mishmash of people from different cultures and areas of the world. How do you go about creating each individual look for them, but then also making it distinct as well?
I think a lot of that is just when it's research and experience, and very often starting with like the wide angle of like what is this school, what is this culture, where are we set, and then started to think about who are these people as a whole, or these boys. So Alexander and I started with the idea of doing uniforms, which was pretty standard at the time in most of the schools. But as I said, that everything was starting to change. So socially, some of the guardrails started to come down in regards to uniforms and hair and all of that. So it seemed more interesting to us to not do uniforms, which is so what I thought of, a lot of schools, if they don't have a uniform, they still have some guidelines for uniforms or how to dress. So I decided that it had to be, a button-down shirt, always a tie. It had to be a blazer and pants. We noticed that some of the boys were wearing jeans too, but they were more dressy jeans at the time. And then, shoes. Also, you have to consider the climate there, and it was, winter, and as you can see, most of that snow was real, so we were in the cold all the time. Like those kids were bundled up underneath. Or it was it was a lot to keep everybody warm, and there were days when just those clothes weren't enough. So so starting with the big picture of that, and then starting to look at, okay, so what were the blazers of the time? Okay, there. So I did a big pull from Western Costume here in LA, and noticed that everything was brown. There was not gray or black. So there was some blue, there was some browns, some warm browns and some yellows and some orange and a lot of tan. So I thought this is really the place to start. And then, I also wanted texture. So that's when, like the kind of standard for educational places is tweeds, and beautiful tweeds that you can't get anymore, and corduroy, and shirts that were either blue or white. Or I did notice, when I did get my hands on a color photo, that there was some, brighter colors, but Alexander wanted to contain that a little bit more to either blue or white shirts. And then, some pants were wild. I mean, I found photos of kids wearing red pants to school and boots and, more, sort of airing into the mid-70s of fashion. And what I learned from my friends who had attended some of those schools was these kids were privileged. I mean, they weren't all privileged, but a lot of them in reference, in the movie came from money, and their parents would snap them up and they would go to Europe for vacations, and they would bring back their European clothes or their European influences, or their a lot of my friends' had gone to India. So there was a huge influence of Indian culture and Indian clothes at the time, which you'll see more at the party, not the school. It just didn't seem appropriate for the school because I wanted to still keep a more uniform look rather than just, a wild, like the kids have been everywhere look. And what I noticed was that a lot of teenagers don't feel the cold. So they weren't really layered up with like big, big coats and big, sweaters and layers like I'm sitting in now in a 50-degree LA sunny day. So, and then fine tuning the characters. So when I think of Angus, he had moved around schools. So, I looked at a tie that I had for him, and it's got little shields on it, but it looks like an older tie. So I thought in my mind, oh, that could have been his dad's tie. And he wears, and it ties in emotionally to his dad. So you see that when we first see him and when we see him saying goodbye to Paul Hunnam, he wears the same tie. And then, I've got the bratty Brady Hepner kid who, I always imagined was, his parents were very wealthy, and he had gone traveling. And yeah, and then there's the jock who's wearing the leather jacket from the school, and it has more sporty attire. So that's really just, the way, kind of focus in on, that's the way I work anyway. It's kind of like, you work outside in, like you get a broad picture and then you just kind of like hone in on smaller nuances of character. And it all helps. It all helps when you know who's cast and you get a body and a face, and sometimes it makes sense, and sometimes you have to do a U-turn and completely change what you were thinking for that character and adapt to the body and the face of who's been cast. But yeah, I think that answers your question.
I think you've opened a whole Pandora's box of questions with those
All right.
answers
Oh,
because
go ahead.
because there's I guess like as because it's like what you're doing is so it's like translating words into a visual aid of how people would look. But I guess with the research as well, probably it really enhances that aid into what you want to create and what's going to be correct for the characters. I think the idea of like people wearing red trousers and boots to school or certain things is quite out there, really, isn't it? Especially during those times.
Yeah, yep, yep. I know, I was shocked by when I saw some of the photos in color, it was shocking. But then so was, I mean, hair was kind of a thing too.
Yeah, it's even the jock who has long hair is his dad doesn't want him to come back if he still has long hair.
Yeah,
And I can imagine as well during that time, if you had long hair, people shouting, hippie at you or other, maybe other rude words that I don't know that could be used of the time. But it's just so funny how we probably even see it now, and we probably do it subconsciously, but just how the younger generation want to create their own look and feel, and have their own identity, and then the older generation are always slightly scared of it, or they're not,
Mm.
it's like that's not of our time, so why are you doing it this way?
Mm. Well, there's always, I think it's human nature to just be wary of otherness, and otherness can take the form of race or dress or hair, even, or just skin color. But
Mm.
that doesn't really pertain to the holdovers so much, I don't think.
No, I think there's just little nuances there, sprinkled in so that as audience members you're aware of what's happening and the sort of environment that the boys are in compared to what's going out, what's happening in the outside world. And I think you see that in the scene with when they're in the bar and Angus has a bit of a confrontation with someone from who served in Vietnam.
Yeah.
There's that sort of you have that he gets a sort of taste of the real world compared to what they're used to at
Hmm.
Barton Academy, sorry.
Yes, it's also a confrontation with the potential for him also going to Vietnam.
Yes, and I could imagine as well during that time it'd be quite scary, just the all the stories that you hear, but then also having that experience first hand from Mary Lamb,
Mhm.
whose son passed away in Vietnam, and like having those sort of that realization of I don't think you realize how lucky you are in the situation that you're in, not to be going over there.
Yep. Hanging on by a thread, though.
I know. But I
Mhm.
also was curious about something that you mentioned as well when you're fitting people once they're cast is like the frame and look of how they are. Fashion has changed quite a lot over the years in terms of how we are sort of made to measure how clothes fit and how they're worn, but then also on top of that, our body image has changed as well. How do you go about fitting someone in 60s and 70s clothes when they're in the body of someone who is in the 2020s?
Mm. That's such a great question because think about like try to get blazers on teenage bodies who they're not adults and they're not kid size. So they're halfway between and they have to look like they fit. That was one of the supreme challenges I had, including finding enough items to put on bodies. But bodies have changed and clothes have changed. The I mean, I think things have got recycled, and it was important for me to be able to access 70s type clothes in stores, when I absolutely needed, because flares were, I was able to get some flares and some, I was still able to get shoes that were period appropriate or adjacent. They weren't from the period, but people's feet have changed too. Feet are bigger, bodies are bigger. Fast food was not around in 1969 and 70. So hence bodies are bigger and changed. And this was also made in COVID times. And I would have even very seasoned actors come, that I would get their measurements and sizes before they'd turn up for a fitting. And, I would have clothes in the room for them, and only to learn that they were two sizes bigger than they said, which when you're on a limited budget with no rental houses anywhere around you, or the closest one 3 hours away, that's not a fun day when that happens. So a lot of stuff happens on a wing and a prayer, really, and thinking ahead, being really practical, and like knowing ahead of time that okay, gonna get a bunch of kids, and I'm gonna have to buy the smallest size blazers, or try and find 100 size 36 to 38 size blazers to fit kids ranging from, 5 foot to 6 foot in height. So yes, it's a really good question because a lot of the time we make movie magic and nobody really understands all the practical considerations that we as costume designers and my team have to do workarounds for.
Yeah, and especially during COVID time, where I'll be honest with myself, probably let myself go a little bit during that sort of time. So because you're all staying at home and kind of
Yeah.
just for me, it was just like too much ice cream. So and enjoying that, unfortunately. And if you do have certain frames for people and what is right and what's not right, I can imagine then you could have the perfect outfit, but then if it doesn't fit someone, it's just you're ripping your hair out because then you're like, okay, I kind of have to start again, but then have to see if we can find something else that's going to
Well, yeah.
work.
Yeah. And it's not like you can just run to the store with like, oh, like, what now? Where do I go? What do I do? Oh, so, and I can't just run out to the store 3 hours away because then that whole throws my whole fitting schedule out. But all those boys, I fitted in one day. I fitted Dominic Sessa a couple of times before we went to camera, but all those boys, not the background boys, but the principal boys, I fitted 2 days before we went to camera, which is it's a phenomenal feat to do that. To have enough clothes in the room that you can even get on their bodies, and then to actually fit 8 people in a day and be able to assign items to work to go to camera and have them fitted and ready and right on, speak to the character. Well, it's a pretty amazing feat. And I couldn't have done that 20 years ago early in my career, but I've just learned how to do these workarounds. That's what we do.
So when you're doing principal fittings for the boys, how long would that roughly take between each fitting? Would you say each fitting was about 90 minutes, an hour to about 90 minutes?
Yeah, yeah. I had, I think I only had an hour for each. I think I only had an hour for each that day. I mean, if I did 8 a day, I mean, that's 8 hours of fitting. That's a lot. That's a lot because it takes a lot of mental energy to you kind of first you've got to find the character, then you've got to you kind of size up the body, then you size up the clothes, and then if you're lucky, something fits, and then you might find the character. Sometimes you don't, but I was lucky that day that I was on a roll and I found these characters. And then you start working with, oh, okay, well, that jacket, that's the jacket. That's their jacket. They only need one jacket. Now I'll make everything else work around that jacket. Or, you find the pair of shoes. And sometimes that's the starting point. Sometimes it's another element. But if you can get like a couple of good solid looks going from one fitting, sometimes you'll be able to roll with that. And I think Alexander was around that day, so I was able to get immediate feedback, which is always useful because him and I have a great collaboration. It's not always as sweet as we have, but having immediate feedback is worth everything because it saves a lot of time and energy and ultimately money. But we were on a tight schedule then, so it all worked out. I mean, the magic happened that day, thank goodness, because I hate to think what else would have happened. Just was on my A game that day. And of course, I had a great team as well. Had an amazing assistant, Chandra, very supportive team. So we all did the best we could because we really liked the material, and it makes a huge difference to, just have a job, or you're really working on something that you know you will enjoy watching, or you somehow intuit that it's going to be a great movie or a good movie. Even a good movie will help engage your team with you and support. People, we're known to, go the extra mile in our department, and probably you understand that coming from film, that, we all give 110%, sometimes more. But it's more than a job because we dedicate so much of our time and hours in a day to what we do. So when you work on something that resonates with you, it becomes a joy rather than a job. But this one was a joy. It was a stressful joy, but it was still a joy.
I think, well, even listening back to hearing that, how many fittings you had to do, because it's, as you said, like you have a starting point and then you have to sort of build around it to what's working and what's not working. But on top of like doing the fittings, as you said, like mentally, you have to be on top of what you're doing because you have so little time between their fit, the turnover between each boy, for each fitting
Mm,
is probably
yeah.
minimal. And then on top of that, you know that you have to make notes of what works, what doesn't work, what you will need to
Mhm.
be replaced,
Yep.
so that you could be in time for when they're shooting in a couple of days.
Yeah, yeah, all of that. Yeah. I mean, you can have someone walk in the room and yeah, you have to assess that. You'll put something on and the color's not right, but you really want it in a blue, not a green. So, you have to get that notated at the same time as, get a photo done, get them into something else. And yeah, I like to put outfits together before people come in, but that's my method. That I didn't always do, but it just works for me now. It's very time efficient, but if none of it fits, then you scrap that. Oh, let me go into the stacks and see if there's anything here that's, in blue or in a like two sizes up. And that itself takes time. That can take 10 minutes out of an hour to go find something else. And, you know, more than likely it happens.
Yes, and I guess if you have trying to sort of balance, trying to make sure what you have right is correct, and then also what the actor has on is comfortable and they're comfortable in it, or if they're not allergic to any of the material
Yeah.
that might be on there as well, that's probably plays a part in the planning as well. And especially as younger actors trying to find their character, their fittings maybe might take a little bit longer as they're trying to find what's right for
Hmm.
their character and understanding what's going into their look as well, because it's all well and good as as an audience member seeing an actor, you think that their preparation is more to do with how they say their lines and the facial expressions, but it's also
Hmm.
the whole world that they're living in, what they're wearing, why they would
Hmm.
wear this, or how they would wear something. If it's a way that they wear a jacket or a bag, or if they
Hmm.
had a polo shirt on, does that have all the buttons done up, or would it be halfway done up, or would they
Hmm.
leave one at the top undone because of how they feel comfortable in it? But
Hmm.
as a costume designer working with younger talent and people who might be a little bit more newer to working in films, how do you help them how do you help them find their character and try to sort of steer them in the way of what costumes they should be looking to wear, from what you guys have?
Hmm. Well, I guess sometimes when they're young and inexperienced, you're not really working with them as much as you're really guiding them. And sometimes you have to tell them how to wear clothes. I mean, I remember, and also young actors grow. So, I've had that happen many times. A child will A 6-year-old will start a movie and be a certain size and then will have grown 2 inches or 3 inches by the end, and you have to accommodate for that too. But also, especially period clothes, sometimes they don't know how to wear period clothes. So a lot of it is, not a lot of it, but there is some imposition on my part. Like, yes, you need to wear your jacket all the way up. It's cold. You need to put gloves on and you need to, wear your scarf in a certain way. And they're pretty compliant at a young age. And because I am a collaborator, I will ask, are you comfortable? Are you warm? Are you, how do the shoes fit? There's always adjustments to be had. But also a lot of young boys don't know how to tie ties because they don't do it anymore. They haven't worn ties in schools here for a long time, or like most schools, but so they need an education in that way too. Yeah, but most adult actors who've experienced, they've done enough work to work with you from the inside out rather than the outside in. Because I think you can tell when, even in Dominic's fitting, I'd put certain things on him which were really great period appropriate things. I had a lot of clothes for him when he came in. And his body is so long and his face is so long that those big 70s collars just made him look longer and thinner. And so I had to kind of peel back the real periodness of his clothes to suit his body, so that there was more of an inference rather than an overt, like, here we are in 1970 look. So, you learn to make quick reads of things like that. But also, explain why, if you've got time to do, why you're doing a certain thing, why a certain thing might be a color, the way it is, or yeah, yeah. And most, especially young actors, they're so enthusiastic, they're willing to learn. I mean, it is a schoolroom for them after all.
Yeah, and well, firstly, I think it's funny to hear like people having those young actors come in and they don't know how to tie a tie. I guess it's like that shows the sort of difference in education systems, like compared to America and UK. Because in UK we had to wear school uniform and always
Yep.
have to wear a tie. So it's quite funny when people say I don't know how to tie a tie. I can tie a tie, but maybe not very well, but I can still do one.
Yeah.
Um, but it's funny to hear like people not being able to do those little things, and
Yeah.
those nuances. But on top of that as well, the things that you need to still take in consideration, like if they grow a little bit during the shoot or after a fitting, that would probably, is that something you obviously take consideration on, but then is that something that always plays in your mind, being like, oh, this is perfect, but it could be a bit too short in a few weeks' time if they grow an inch or two.
Yeah, it depends. It depends a lot on, are they wearing that outfit the entire movie? How how can you cheat? Sometimes you push the sleeves up. To my own observation in watching the holdovers, there, to me, some glaringly obvious things. Sometimes when the sleeves are too long for the jacket. But when you look at reality, people aren't perfect. Just got so accustomed to seeing perfect costumes in movies, where everything is like highly tailored and the sleeves are hitting at the right place and the collars the right size and the ties not at the same the where it should be. But in reality, life isn't like that. You look at people, they get sloppy and things aren't clean and pressed and perfect. So I think it's also important to embrace some imperfections too.
Yeah, and you're right that like in real life, I don't think it's very often that you see someone that's always wearing something that's always pristine. Maybe if you go to certain offices, there will be people who might be wearing suits that are so well fitted that they just look like £1 million. But
Hmm.
you're right that those imperfections that people have in their clothes is a sort of characteristic trait. Yeah, characteristic trait, sorry, that they kind of show as a in person before you kind of notice it in how
Yeah.
they speak or behave.
And that's the beauty of working with Alexander too, is he embraces imperfections, like so much to, he'll make a point of it. If you notice Miss Crane's got lipstick on her teeth, I mean, that was totally his idea. When we first see her, she brings cookies. And, that just speaks so much to him. So I was able, when I saw that, I was able to let go of what I considered imperfections. And yeah, I, I would always watch American TV shows, like, things like CSR and like all the shows that were set in courts. Like, and then I went to court here in the US, like nobody dresses like that. They are so sloppy and unput together and like wearing, polyester blouses and suits. It is nothing like the TV version. So, yeah, that's my observation anyway. So better not ask me to do a court drama.
It's funny as well, the two sort of observations that you have is the same when you go to a nightclub, for example, compared to when you see it on the TV. The different, like the incredible difference. I think the only time that I've actually seen a proper, real depiction of how people would dress and wear stuff in a nightclub is the TV show In-Betweeners. That's the sort of only time I feel like I've actually seen where people like you're like, yeah, that's exactly
Hmm.
how it's like in the UK. No trainers at the time, have to wear smart sort of school shoes, shall we say, out, and then a certain shirt and yeah, a certain look as well to haircut as well to complete the look.
Mm, yeah, yeah. And yet, I think the entertainment of Hollywood is always seen as a escapism in a way. And there's a theory that why should why should things be ordinary when they can be out of the ordinary? And this is a fantasy. It's not real. I just happen to have signed up with a director who has a different perspective on things, which I like. And it's kind of spun off other work for me. But I mean, don't get me wrong, I do like to do, heightened reality, highly stylized things too. But this is not the movie that required it.
I think as well, like with directors, they'll all have different perspectives and interpretations of work. Like if you gave a script to five different directors, you'd get five different films. I
Mm.
think the best example of that was, I think it's HBO. They did a TV show called Project Greenlight, I think.
Oh
I think
yeah.
it's and for them to pick the directors, they gave the directors I think it was a 5-page script or 2-page script, and they would
Mm.
go out and make that film. And the contrast that you'd get of how one person would treat it as a comedy, another person would treat it as a drama, another person would treat it as a sort of slick, fast-paced, sort of Scorsese felt, fast-paced moving film.
Mm.
And yeah, it's just incredible to think that nobody had the same sort of style or idea. But the ideas are all the same, but same sort of way of like shooting it or presenting the story in the same way.
Mm. Yep, just as well. We've still got some individualism left.
Yeah, 100%. And I still think there's exciting directors still around, and then there's still a lot of people coming up who are exciting and interesting in what they would like to tell story wise, and the people that we'll work with to create that vision and to bring it on whatever screen that we will be watching on in the next 10, 20, 30 years. But that's always going to be quite important. But to go back to the holdovers, I kind of want to go into Giamatti's character because his clothes are very. I think the best way to say it is you have nailed on the teacher look of how he
Mhm.
dresses with the hats, the shirts that with like the white shirt underneath the shirts, and then also a collection of jumpers where he
Mhm.
has the various cardigans, or they'll have I'm not sure what the technical term is, but the sleeveless jumpers.
They call them sweater vests here.
Uh, Sweater vest. That doesn't
Yeah,
sound right. That doesn't sound
yeah,
right.
yeah, because it's a vest, it's a sweater without its sleeves, which makes it a vest.
I know, but I guess it's the material, right? I think it's the material of it's too
Well,
I don't
well, they're
know,
knitted.
too fluffy to be a vest, but I kind of get it, but then also I just feel like it does not feel right to say there should be. I'm sure that it's like a there must be more another terminology for it, but yeah, sweater vests. Okay,
Or
I've learned something new today.
yeah, or a knitted vest, you could say.
Yes. Yeah. Do you know what? Let's go with knitted vest. I think the
Yeah,
knitted vest is a
yeah.
cooler way of saying it. The sweater vest just makes it sound like something from like gym gear
I
that
know.
people take. With his characters going from there is also is those choices as well, stylistic choices, which I really enjoy, I really like. And then there's one more idea that's come into my head is he has the blazer with the elbow patches, which has always
Mhm.
felt the sort of hand in hand of like what a professor would wear and the idea of it. We've seen it parodied in shows, but then also you do see it in real life, and sometimes you think like oh, that can't be true, and then it actually is. Where do you begin with Paul's character, and what are the collaborations with him, as he is the more seasoned
Mm.
actor, and the creative choices that you'd go and speak with him to the create look for his character?
So this was my third time working with the lovely Paul Giamatti, who I love and adore. And it, the so the first time was Sideways. The second time was a movie called San Andreas, where he played also a professor. But this one is the quintessential academic look. He comes from a family of teachers and academics, and even though the screenplay stated was something like Mr. Hunnam crosses the quad in a greatcoat. And I thought, greatcoat. Okay. So, I collected a bunch of coats in the room I had for a fitting, and then David, the writer, mentioned that he said, "Oh, a toggle coat." Oh, okay, like a pea, no, not a pea coat, oh, like a toggle coat. Okay, so and then I collected some of those, and it was already a description of rumpled corduroy. So I already knew, okay, well, we're going quintessential academic here. So I found all the corduroy I could. I actually went to Western Costume, my favorite resource here in LA, and I put together outfits and I photographed them and I sent them to Alexander and I said, this is this is how I interpret this. What do you think? He said, great, it's perfect. Love that, love that. And then there I went. They weren't his size, so I couldn't use them. But I used some of the bow ties and then started searching for contemporary items that would fit him. So what he does wear is there's a mix of some contemporary items, some contemporary shirts, some real and some period things. And when I finally, so I collected all these items, and when I finally met Paul in New York for his fitting, we tried on a few things, and we tried on a few hats, and we narrowed it down to the coat. That coat, we had a similar hat, but it wasn't the hat. So, and we kind of got our elements like, oh, so this is a look that works. This a knitted vest works better than that. And this color works better than that. And, got him some really comfortable shoes, which he was happy with. And that's where I took it. So, and then, we went back to Boston and started working on finding all the elements that worked for him. And he loved his hat. He just wanted to wear it all the time. When we finally found one that worked, which, we had took some searching. I, yeah, got him some new corduroy suits and got my ager dyer to start working on aging them and making them look rumpled, which was not easy, believe it or not. I mean, the cotton corduroy was so fine a cotton that it wouldn't break down very well. So I think we even put it in the wash at some point just to get some patina on it because it always looked new. And so we did a lot of work on those clothes to make them look older. And then some things I just needed doubles on, so I knew I had to, find things that I could get in multiples of 2 or 3 for either a stunt or the had to fireproof some items, had to fireproof all their changes when they light the Cherries Jubilee, because there's all sorts of laws in different states have fire marshals laws about if you get near fire or flame, or sometimes it's even lighting a cigarette, they request that you have to put fire retardant on all the clothes. And that's a thing. That's not fun for me. I don't like that. But they also have to be natural fiber content. And then they get sprayed with a fire retardant. So, but then we didn't need to do that in the end because we didn't need to. It was all shot in 1 or 2 takes. So nobody got burnt or near the fire.
So the first point is it's interesting that Paul comes from a fa family of teachers because
Yeah.
he's probably this is probably one of the times where he was thinking, you know what, my childhood is going to come into really good effect now because I know exactly the sort of ideas that I have, and then I know who I can share them. I can share them with Wendy, and we can go have a nice back and forth about it. Um,
Yep.
because I've had whatever it was, 20 years as under my parents' roof and know the insides and outs of the sort of patches that my dad would have on his jacket or the
Mhm.
sweater vests he would wear.
Oh, my
um,
granny.
and I guess being from that world as well, you kind of get it and understand is
Yeah,
what's been gone for. And as well, having previously worked with one another,
yeah,
then that definitely probably makes it a lot easier with your shorthand and know what's
yeah,
right, what's not right.
yeah. And sometimes it takes a while to build trust with an actor because they don't know you and they don't know your work, or the way you work or your handle on things. I mean, I guess the worst case scenario for an actor is if a designer just wants to throw clothes on them and that's it. Like maybe that's their worst fear, but sometimes it takes a while to build trust that they'll just let go. But I didn't, I've never had that problem with Paul. He's just such a, you know, beautiful human being that, oh, we've always had that rapport. And, I'll listen to whatever feedback he has, but he's an easy, he's just easy to work with and delightful. And he doesn't complain. He's yeah. Oh, well, we just already had that shorthand. So I think, a first fitting tells all. Like sometimes, you have to grit your teeth and things, you can tell things aren't going well. And that's a really hard fitting to get through. But Paul's always really appreciative and just, I guess we were always in accord with each other. And I mean, he obviously knew, I mean, I'm Australian, so I don't know this world. And even though I was around in this era, um, and I went to a private school, it was not the East Coast prep boys' school in America. So he knew more about where he was coming from than I did. So I had to claim his as an authority, not me.
Again, I think it sort of shows the different cultures that there are in terms of how schools and the school system works in each country, or the sort of way that people would be dressing as well. And having someone who has even more experience going into when you're making your creative decisions and choices makes it probably 1,000 times easier for you on what you want to choose and what's going to look right and what doesn't look right. And having that first-hand experience as well is so valuable. I think sometimes as people and maybe just in everyday life that you don't realize how important that first-hand experience is with people to make decisions and choices in terms of even like the simplest things of like
Putting
I
the
don't know.
wrong color on somebody,
Yeah,
even.
exactly. Thank you.
You know? Yeah, I mean, someone could have a ruddy, undertone to their skin, and you put red on them, and like, whoa, that doesn't work. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Then that's another thing as well, like how colors work in film,
yeah.
and us as humans, how we interact with those colors as well, and watching them on screen. I think
Hmm.
that's always like it's like the human consciousness and brain working and what we associate those colors and what we take from them, because you can see with Paul's characters, they are always sort of more grayer, sort of not grayer, sorry. I would say they're not exactly muted, but they have a certain brightness to them, but they're not overly garish.
They're all
And
in the warm palette, because if you wanted to look at what I did with colors, like Paul looks great in blue. Paul as a human, not as an actor, not in a role, looks great in blue. So I didn't want him to look that good. I think he needed the help of some color to take his character in a different direction, like more just that kind of disheveled brown mess in a way. And then Mary, I I came up with the same idea at the same time Alexander did, that she would reflect the colors of Virgin Mary, which were that beautiful blue and red. And then she segues into purple at some point. And someone mentioned to me that, oh, it's like a bruise. Like, oh yeah, that's very subconscious there. Like she's bruised. And Angus kind of, he's younger, so he kind of has a broader palette too. So he has that beautiful blue. He has a green. He has a maroon. He has he kind of has is more, maybe has a broader palette, is more experimentary, if you want to look at it that way. So yeah, that's what I was thinking, when it came to working with color for these characters.
yes, and I kind of wanted to get on to Mary Lamb's character because it's funny how you mentioned the bruising because I didn't think about that, but then amazing what people can also pick up on it. And then if they say, "Oh, that must have been intentional," it's like, yes, yes, it was. It was definitely like that. That she was healing and it was going through that sort of way. But I
Yeah.
think as well because she's what is it, sort of backup staff, so she's does a lot of work in the kitchens. She'll have more of a uniform than say Paul's character because when you are doing that sort of work, you don't really want to be on your in
Yep.
a dress or whatever because it's it's a lot of hard work that you want to sort of pursue and it's like it's dirty work basically. But
Yeah.
when we do see her out of the her own clothes, when we see her in her own clothes, you did mention the moving into the purple later on in this film, which is like a really nice shade of purple. It's like grape purple, should we say, like a light grape purple. When it came to Mary's style, because she is slightly out of place in that world, that she only took the job so that she could get her son a place at the school, and she's someone that makes very. You can tell she does a lot of makes a lot of sacrifices, and I think for a lot of time she's someone who's thinks about others rather than herself. How do you go about creating the look for her character?
Well, it started with the uniform, the utility look, and then it became a matter of being practical because we couldn't make uniforms, and so we had to be able to buy something that and get it to us quick. So that's how the uniform came about. And then I thought, I don't want to look at a whole like white, that much white in a frame was too much. So I thought, well, how can I diffuse this? How can I, oh, it's cold. It's cold. And then the way the schools are designed is they're a lot of the classrooms are remote from each other, so you do have to walk into the open, into the elements. So I knew that she needed, a jacket or a cardigan or a coat for summer, to go over her uniform a couple of times. And then I ordered some aprons off eBay or something, and they turned up and they weren't quite right. So, and then I just had some made. My team made me one and kind of delivered it to set just as the camera was about to roll. And that one worked. I was really happy with that one because that one worked out well. So that's how I worked with diffusing her uniform and making her look more, I don't know, more interesting, I guess, like layered. And, I did the research that I could. I mean, I forget the names of the women. Oh, I listened to a lot of music. Like I also made like a Spotify playlist of all the hits of 1969 and 70 and played that. And I thought of like Aretha Franklin and the women of her time that might, oh, there was one called Mary Chisholm. She was a politician. Kind of looked at, working women and what they would wear. And, it'd have to be practical. And I ended up, I tried to buy some things, but they didn't work out so well. And we made what we could. But again, we were always short of time. And the, I know there's a chenille lounge dress jacket that she wears watching TV late at night. I've had a lot of compliments on that. I think that was one that I bought online and it turned up and it was pink. And I thought, no, this is not going to work. Let me, throw that in some blue dye, and it ended up the purple that it is now on screen, which I think is, it looks great. I think it suits her and suits the scene. And yeah, I didn't ever want her to look too like she had too many clothes, but she hadn't, she was still proud and still cared for herself and cared for the way she looked. And, sometimes there were times when I tied in the colors. I tied in, when she goes to visit her sister Peggy, I consciously tied in them to look similar. Like they're both in blue in that scene. And I made the outfit that she wears when she meets the boys for dinner at the restaurant before they do the Cherries Jubilee. And unfortunately, we don't see it. When we shot that, we actually saw her coming in. And there was probably like a full frame where we could see the whole outfit, but we don't. We really just see the shirt. And I think the pink really suits her. I think it's a really kind of works in the palette, and it's very, very soft and feminine. I think that's where she's kind of almost exuding like her femininity there. Like she's voicing her empathy and her practicality and kindness. And that to me was a color that resonated for that emotion. And I got stuck a lot because I knew the party dress was going to be a couple of scenes. It was a sequence, and it was an important scene, really important scene for her. And I had some other fabrics and other ideas, and I just couldn't, I kept putting it off. It was one of those things, when you have to do something, it's really important, but I would start and then I think, no, that's not right. So I really hesitated on this dress. And then in the end, I finally settled on this style, and my workroom really worked with me, and so did Divine, really. We collaborated a lot on this dress because she had some ideas which were probably bolder and I didn't think were flattering. There were so many other possibilities I could have done. And even to this day, I think, oh, I mean, I like the dress that we ended up with, but there were other things that I felt would be equally as good. But that dress, I think, really works for her in the scene. And I think it's a very flattering shape on her, and it's kind of very fluid, and uh, it almost feels like she's stepped out. It definitely feels like she stepped out of her uniform, and she's ready to embrace, some more joy in her life, even though she gets triggered by the event and Artie Shaw. And I think it just works because then, she breaks down and the dress is kind of soft and dark, and Angus is wearing the same color. And I feel like it just helps them bond a lot, having the same color. And then we just, we come back and we end with her, in the uniform again. She's making a statement. Here I am. I'm not going anywhere. I'm happy to have a job. So a lot of that is, a coda to her beginning and end, and the same, Angus beginning and ends similarly. So yeah, and I didn't want to accessorize her very much. I didn't, I wanted to keep her really simple and plain, and really, she just has the same earrings the entire movie except for the party. And then she wears a cross, which we don't see a lot, but it's there all the time. So that's Mary Mary.
The hearing the answer of how the different looks were created again is like opened a lot of questions in my mind because there's I guess where I'll start off with is the when you're creating a dress from scratch for a character in a certain time period. Where does that begin? Obviously, you do the drawings and designing of how you want it to look, but then in terms of choosing the color and material, how meticulous do you go through thinking about what's going to be right for that time period and how it's going to look on screen, but also how it will feel on a character as well?
Oh, it's all part of the design process. I mean, yeah, all of that. It's about colors that work for them on them as a body with skin color. And it's about how it embellishes or supports a character. And then in the big picture, it's how I'm creating, if there's a scene with 10 people in it, how does this all work together? It's like a painting. You have to consider, do I have too many reds in here? Do I have too many dark colors? Where are they going to be staged? Sometimes, if I have a good team that I work with, I can work with staging some people, or, oh, I don't like that. I can go and say, can you pull that person or move that person because, oh, I want to see this. This is a really good character piece here. Can you put them center camera or near the camera? Yeah, it's all for consideration. And, sometimes those ideas come at the very beginning. Sometimes you could start working with an idea, with a production designer and that's another element to consider. What does the set look like? What is the wallpaper? Is there wallpaper? Are they going to clash? Do I need to do something plain? Do I need to do plain and textured? How's the lighting going to look? What sort of film stock are they using? Or, what camera are they using? All of those, a lot of considerations to the design process.
Yes, and amazing how, as you said as well, when you're working with a production designer and the discussions that they have, and also the set decorators as well, of how what's going to be filled on a screen, what color it will be, because you don't want your character to be wearing the same color to then
Yeah.
be washed out by what's on there and vice versa. But I think it's the ending, sorry, of when Angus and Mary are sitting at the end and they're sort of both back into their uniform because they're that change of like we're both not leaving, we're
Yeah.
here, we're comfortable, kind of found ourselves where we are, and had a profound experience. And I quite like that sort of image where Angus is in his like a shirt and tie, and Wendy's in
Mhm.
her, not Wendy, Mary, sorry, is in her uniform as well.
Yeah.
But I think with her colors as well, they're not too bright, but they're just the right sort of look of the time of like what would be for characters to wear and those colors. Because now I'm thinking about it, when I look at that purple, it reminds my gran now, um,
Mhm.
of like what she used to wear, or the clothes that she did have in her wardrobe, and it's still quite like again another way of how an audience member will connect to it in a different way, in that sort of and where their mind will go to with it. So, just to wrap up the episode, what was your favorite costume to design?
Oh, too many favorites. I mean, I guess all of it, because all of it they're all part of a piece of the puzzle. I can't think of any. I mean, I would think, because I really didn't design. I can't consider I designed only the things that I made from scratch. So, which were few and far between. So like the rest is really about putting the pieces of the puzzle together. So I think that is probably more, I would consider, a favorite, that it worked. It worked under all the extreme conditions that we were working under, the lack of funds, the lack of clothes, quantities of clothes, the weather, the blizzards, all of these odds that were so against us. But me and my team prevailed and have made this beautiful movie. And I think that has to be something that makes a favorite for me.
I guess it's like picking your favorite
Child.
child. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, and how do you go about doing something like that and making it fair, really? And I guess with something like the holdovers, where I guess as an audience member, when you're watching a period piece, it's the way that you kind of, I think you touched upon as well with your breakdown artist, the patina that's used and how you've created a look that feels so in tune with the film and that time period. That for me, if somebody was like, "Oh, what would you say a film from the 70s?" It's like I could that comes to mind. Then something like The Holdovers could come to mind now,
Mm.
and add to that sort of library of research if people ever ask, because that's how I feel that I'm in that sort of zone with it and look and feel.
Mm. Yay. Oh,
Wendy, thank you so much for your time today. The Holdovers is now on VOD in America, but it will be now out. It's out now in cinemas in the UK. Go out, watch Wendy's work and Wendy and her team's work, and enjoy the film. Thank you again so much for your time, Wendy.
thank you, Robert. All the best.
You take care and bye bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening. Please subscribe, rate, and review this podcast.